The town of Grayvale had always been the kind of place where people preferred to look away, not because they were cruel by nature, but because acknowledging the darkness meant confronting it, and confrontation required courage that most didn't possess. The high school sat at the edge of town like a fortress of brick and iron, its hallways echoing with laughter that often masked cruelty, its classrooms filled with students who had learned early that survival meant blending in. Elena Dracos was not one who could blend in. She arrived every morning in her father's old van, a vehicle that wheezed and rattled as it pulled into the parking lot. The other students would watch from the windows as her father, a tall, thin man with eyes that seemed perpetually tired, carefully lifted her wheelchair from the back and helped her into it. Elena's legs had never worked properly, a condition the doctors called a degenerative muscular disorder, but which her family knew had deeper, older roots. Her pale skin seemed almost translucent in the morning light, her dark hair falling in waves around a face that was beautiful in an unsettling way, too perfect, too still, like a porcelain doll that had been locked away for centuries. "There's the freak," Marcus Bellingham whispered to his friends as Elena wheeled herself through the main entrance. Marcus was 17, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Beside him stood Tyler Chun and Jessica Moreno, his constant companions in torment. Together, they formed a trinity of cruelty that the teacher seemed powerless or unwilling to stop. Elena heard the whisper. She always heard them. Her senses were sharper than anyone knew, a gift and a curse of her bloodline. But she kept her eyes forward, her hands steady on the wheels of her chair, moving to the corridor like a ghost haunting her own life. "Did you see what she was wearing yesterday?" Jessica laughed, her voice carrying, like something from a Victorian funeral. "Does she think she's in some kind of vampire movie?" The irony of the statement would have been amusing if it weren't so painful. Elena's fingers tightened on the armrest of her wheelchair, but she said nothing. Speaking only made it worse. Reacting only gave them power. Her father had taught her this, had begged her to remain silent, to endure, to remember that she was different in ways that went beyond her disability. "You are special, Mija," he would say in their small apartment filled with old books and strange herbs hanging from the ceiling. "But the world is not ready for what you are. They see only what frightens them, and they attack what they fear. You must be strong. You must wait." Wait for what? Elena often wondered. Wait for the day when her tormentors grew up? Wait for some miraculous change in human nature? Or wait for something else? Something darker and more inevitable? Her first class was English literature, taught by Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 50s who genuinely tried to see her students as individuals. Elena took her usual seat near the back, away from the windows. Direct sunlight didn't burn her skin as the legend suggested, but it drained her energy, made her feel weak and exposed. She preferred the shadows, the corners where she could observe without being observed. "Today, we're discussing Dracula," Mrs. Patterson announced, writing the title on the board. Bram Stoker's classic exploration of the foreign, the dangerous, the other in Victorian society. "Who can tell me what the count represents?" Hands shot up. "Evil," someone called out. "Sexual predation," another voice offered, causing nervous laughter. "What about you, Lena?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently. "You're always so quiet. What do you think Dracula represents?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Elena felt her throat tighten. She could feel their stares like physical weight, their judgment, their assumptions. Marcus was smirking in the third row, already preparing some cruel remark. "Loneliness," Elena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He represents eternal loneliness. The price of being immortal and different in a world that can never truly understand you." The room fell silent. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with something like recognition, as if she glimpsed, for just a moment, the depth of pain behind those words. "That's remarkably insightful, Elena." "Thank you." But the moment passed, and the class moved on, and Elena retreated back into her silence, back into the shadows where she belonged. Lunch was the worst part of every day. The cafeteria was a battlefield where social hierarchies were reinforced with every table grouping, every laugh, every pointed exclusion. Elena usually ate in the library, but today the librarian was conducting an inventory and had closed the space to students. She had no choice but to enter the cafeteria. pushing her wheelchair through the double doors and feeling the familiar weight of hundreds of eyes turning toward her. She found an empty table in the far corner, near the emergency exit. Her lunch was simple: a sandwich her father had made, some fruit, and a thermos of dark, thick liquid that she told anyone who asked was a protein shake for her condition. It was, in a sense, though the protein came from sources that would horrify her classmates. Well, a voice said above her, "Marcus." Of course. He slid into the seat across from her, his friends flanking him like soldiers. All alone, Elena was surprised. It's almost like nobody wants to sit with the weird, crippled girl. "Leave me alone, Marcus," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. She could feel it, the old hunger, the ancient fury that lived in her blood. Her father had warned her about losing control, about what would happen if she let the monster inside break free. Or what? Marcus leaned forward, his smile cruel. "What are you going to do? Roll over my foot? Maybe cry to your freaky dad." Tyler laughed, reaching across the table to grab Elena's sandwich. "What's this? Looks disgusting. Probably matches her blood. Is it even red, or is it some kind of black sludge?" The thermos. His hand was moving toward the thermos. If they opened it, if they saw what was inside, if they made her drink in public, expose what she truly was. "Please," Elena whispered, and she hated how desperate she sounded. "Just leave me alone." "Please," Jessica mocked in a high-pitched voice. "Just leave me alone." Pathetic. Something snapped. Elena's eyes, usually a muted brown, flashed with a deeper darkness, a red gleam that came and went so quickly that most people would dismiss it as a trick of the light. But Marcus saw it, and for just a second, fear flickered across his face. Then his pride kicked in, and the fear transformed into rage. "Did you just try to intimidate me, freak?" He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Other students were watching now, sensing drama, hungry for entertainment. "You think you're special? You think you're scary?" He reached out and shoved her shoulder, not hard enough to knock her from her chair, but hard enough to make her gasp. Tyler grabbed her backpack and dumped its contents on the floor. Books, pens, her carefully organized notes scattering across the dirty cafeteria tile. "Marcus, that's enough." A voice called out. It was David Lynn, one of the few students who occasionally showed Elena kindness. But his protest was weak, uncertain, and Marcus ignored it completely. "Pick them up," Marcus commanded, gesturing to the scattered belongings. "Oh, wait, you can't, can you?" "Because you're broken. Useless. A waste of space." The cafeteria had gone quiet. Teachers were nowhere to be seen. They never were when it mattered. Elena looked at her scattered belongings, at the faces watching with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination, at Marcus standing over her like a conqueror, and something inside her whispered, they deserved to know, they deserved to see, they deserved to fear. But she pushed it down. She always pushed it down. Instead, she carefully maneuvered her wheelchair, preparing to lower herself to the floor to gather her things, to endure this humiliation as she had endured countless others, to survive another day in the prison of her own difference. "That's right," Marcus said, watching her struggle. "Know your place, freak." Elena's hands shook as she reached for her notebook. The thermos had rolled under a nearby table, and she prayed no one would notice it, would pick it up, would investigate its contents. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Wait. Endure. Survive. But how much longer could she wait? How much more could she endure? And when survival became its own form of death, what then? The bell rang, mercifully ending lunch. Students filed out, some casting sympathetic glances in Elena's direction, but none stopping to help. David Lynn hesitated near the door, guilt clear on his face, but in the end, he too left. Only Elena remained in the emptying cafeteria, still gathering her scattered belongings, still bleeding inside from wounds that no one else could see. As she finally retrieved the thermos and tucked it safely into her backpack, she didn't notice the small bat that had landed on the windowsill outside, watching her with intelligent eyes that gleamed with something far beyond animal awareness. The hunt had begun. The ancient ones were watching, and the time for waiting was almost over. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as school let out, and Elena Dracos wheeled herself toward the designated pickup area where her father would be waiting. She moved slowly, deliberately taking the long route around the building to avoid the main rush of students. Her backpack sat heavy in her lap, its contents finally reorganized after the lunchtime humiliation, but the weight she carried went far beyond books and papers. The late autumn air had turned crisp, and the sky above Grayvale was painted in shades of orange and purple, beautiful in a melancholic way that matched Elena's perpetual state of mind. Dead leaves skittered across the pavement, caught in small wind currents, and she found herself envying their freedom. How easily they moved, how gracefully they accepted being carried by forces beyond their control. "Elena! Wait up!" A voice called behind her. She turned to see David Lynn jogging toward her, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He was slightly out of breath when he reached her, his expression earnest and apologetic. "I'm sorry about lunch. I wanted to help, but—" "It's fine, David," Elena interrupted, though her voice carried no warmth. She appreciated his occasional kindness, but she'd learned that sympathy without action was just another form of abandonment. "You can't fight everyone's battles." "That's not an excuse," David insisted, falling into step beside her as she continued moving. "Marcus is a coward who picks on you because he knows you can't physically fight back. Someone needs to stand up to him. And that someone is you?" Elena asked, raising an eyebrow. David was thin, barely 5'7", with a build of someone who spent more time with books and weights. "He'd destroy you, David, and then you'd become his next target. I don't need that on my conscience." They walked, or rather, Elena rolled and David walked, in silence for a moment. The courtyard was emptying out, students rushing toward buses or cars, or the freedom of walking home. Elena's father's van wasn't in sight yet, which meant he was probably running late from his shift at the warehouse. He worked brutal hours to afford their modest apartment and her medical expenses, though neither of them ever discussed the fact that her medical expenses included very specific dietary requirements that no insurance company would ever cover. "Can I ask you something?" David said suddenly, his voice dropping lower. "And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." Elena felt a familiar tension coil in her stomach. Questions were dangerous. Questions led to revelations, and revelations led to exposure. "What?" "That thing Marcus said, about your blood, and how you always avoid the sun, and how you never eat regular food in front of anyone." And he paused, seeming to struggle with how to phrase his next words. "Are you sick? Like really sick? Is that why you're in the wheelchair?" It was a reasonable question, and the answer he was fishing for was one that Elena had allowed people to assume for years. Better they think she was battling some tragic illness than suspect the truth. But something in his voice, some genuine concern rather than morbid curiosity, made her consider telling him something closer to reality. "I have a genetic condition," she said carefully, which was true in a sense. "It's rare, very rare. It affects my mobility, my sensitivity to sunlight, my dietary needs. There's no cure and it's progressive." "I'm sorry," David said, and he sounded like he meant it. "That's terrible. But you're really smart. Elena, probably the smartest person in our class. You could probably—" He never finished his sentence. Marcus Bellingham appeared from behind a pillar near the courtyard entrance, flanked by Tyler and Jessica. They'd clearly been waiting, planning this encounter, and Elena's heart sank as she realized they positioned themselves between her and the main exit. Her father's van was nowhere in sight, and the courtyard had emptied enough that there were no teachers visible, no authorities to witness whatever was about to happen. Well, Marcus said, cracking his knuckles in an exaggerated gesture. "The freak has found herself a boyfriend. Didn't know anyone was that desperate, Lynn." "Leave her alone, Marcus," David said, but his voice shook. Elena could smell his fear. Literally smell it, a sharp, acrid scent that activated predatory instincts she constantly fought to suppress. "Or what?" Tyler laughed, moving to block David's path. "You gonna do something about it? You're even more pathetic than she is." "I said leave her alone." David's voice cracked as he tried to sound authoritative, but he was trembling visibly now. Elena wanted to tell him to run, to save himself, that she could endure whatever they planned to do. But before she could speak, Marcus shoved David hard in the chest, sending him stumbling backward. "I'm talking to the cripple, not you," Marcus snarled. Then he turned his attention to Elena, his eyes glinting with malice. "You know what? I'm tired of seeing your face every day. Tired of your freaky eyes, your weird clothes, your whole Victorian ghost routine. This is our school, and you don't belong here." "Marcus, don't." Elena started, but Jessica cut her off. "Don't what? Don't tell you the truth? Everyone thinks it. Elena, everyone wishes you'd just disappear. You make people uncomfortable. You're like a walking corpse that somehow ended up in biology class. The word would have hurt once upon a time. But Elena had been called worse, had endured worse, and she'd learned to build walls around the parts of herself that could still feel pain. What frightened her more was the look in Marcus's eyes, the way Tyler and Jessica were positioning themselves around her wheelchair, cutting off escape routes. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was something darker. "I'm going to ask you nicely one time," Elena said, her voice dropping to a tone that didn't sound entirely human. "Move out of my way." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "Or what? You'll curse me? Put a hex on me? Go ahead, witch. Show us your magic tricks." He reached out and grabbed the handles of her wheelchair. Elena's hands gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles went white. She could feel her control slipping, feel the ancient fury rising like a tide of blood in her veins. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Wait, endure, survive. But the words were growing faint, drowned out by another voice, older and darker. Make them pay. Make them fear. Show them what you truly are. "Marcus, let go of the chair," David said, stepping forward despite his obvious terror. "This isn't funny anymore." "Who said I was trying to be funny?" Marcus replied. Then, with a sudden violent motion, he tilted the wheelchair backward. Elena felt herself falling in slow motion. The world inverted. Sky where ground should be, ground rushing up to meet her. She tried to catch herself, but her weak leg provided no support, and her arms couldn't compensate quickly enough. She hit the pavement hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact, pain exploding through her body like lightning. Her backpack flew open, its contents scattering across the courtyard for the second time that day. Books, pens, papers, and the thermos. The thermos rolled across the concrete, its cap loosening, dark red liquid beginning to leak out. "Oh my God!" Jessica gasped, pointing at the spreading puddle. "Is that blood? Is that actually blood?" "What the hell?" Tyler backed away, his face pale. Elena lay on the cold concrete, her wheelchair on its side a few feet away, her body screaming with pain, both physical and emotional. But worse than any of that was the exposure, the revelation, the moment she'd feared her entire life. The thermos continued to leak, its contents unmistakable now. Too thick to be juice, too dark to be anything but what it was. "You're drinking blood?" Marcus's voice had changed, shock replacing cruelty. "You're actually drinking blood? What the fuck are you?" David was frozen, staring at the thermos with an expression of horrified realization. Everything was clicking into place for him. The pallor, the sun avoidance, the dietary restrictions, the genetic condition that had no name. His eyes met Elena's, and she saw the question forming. "What are you?" Elena tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out. Tears of rage and shame streamed down her face, and she hated herself for crying, hated herself for being weak, hated herself for ever believing she could exist in their world. "Freak!" Jessica screamed, backing away. "She's a freak. She's drinking blood. Someone call the police. Call someone." "We need to get out of here," Tyler said, grabbing Marcus's arm. "Man, this is insane. What if she's diseased? What if—" But Marcus stood transfixed, staring at Elena with a mixture of disgust and something else. Triumph. "I knew you were wrong," he said slowly. "I knew you weren't human. You're a monster, a vampire, a real fucking vampire." The word hung in the air like a curse. Elena looked up at him through her tears, and for the first time since entering Grayvale High School, she stopped hiding. She stopped pretending. She let them see the truth in her eyes, the red gleam that flickered there, the ancient hunger, the inhuman nature that no amount of medical excuses could explain away. "Yes," she whispered, and her voice carried power now, carried centuries of pain and rage and loneliness. "Yes, I am." The confession should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like death. Marcus stumbled backward, his bravado crumbling. Tyler and Jessica were already running, their screams echoing across the courtyard. David remained frozen, his expression unreadable. And Elena lay there on the cold concrete, bleeding from a scraped elbow, her secret spilled like the blood from her thermos, her life as she knew it over. She closed her eyes and did something she hadn't done in years. She called out, not with words, but with her mind, with her blood, with the ancient connection that bound her to the darkness. It was a summons, a prayer, a scream of rage directed at the twilight sky. Ajudama, Vino Lamine, Erdalucine Sant. Help me, come to me, show them who I am. The wind stopped. The few remaining sounds of the courtyard, distant voices, car engines, the rustle of dead leaves, all fell silent. And in that silence, Elena heard the response. A single screech in the distance, high-pitched and hungry. Then another, and another. David's eyes widened as he looked up at the sky. "Elena," he breathed, "what did you do?" But Elena couldn't answer. She was trapped between two worlds, two selves. The girl who wanted to be human, and the creature whose blood demanded acknowledgement. The concrete beneath her felt cold and hard and real. The last solid thing in the world that was about to dissolve into nightmare. Marcus had stopped running. He stood at the edge of the courtyard, staring at the sky, which was darkening unnaturally fast. The orange and purple sunset was being swallowed by something else. Something darker, a shadow that spread like ink across the heavens. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Elena opened her eyes and looked up. Through her tears, through her pain, through her shame, she saw them coming. Hundreds of them, thousands perhaps. Wings beating in synchronized fury, small bodies moving with collective purpose. Their screeches now forming a chorus that sounded almost like words in an ancient language. The bats had answered her call, and they were coming for blood. The sky above Grayvale High School transformed from twilight into something that resembled the onset of apocalypse. What had been a normal autumn evening became a canvas of writhing darkness as the swarm descended, their collective form blocking out what remained of the dying sun. The temperature dropped precipitously, not the gradual cooling of evening, but a sudden, unnatural plunge that turned breath to mist and raised goosebumps on every exposed piece of flesh. Elena remained on the cold concrete, her body still racked with pain from the fall, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She could feel them, each individual consciousness within the swarm, thousands of tiny heartbeats synchronized with her own, thousands of pairs of eyes that saw through darkness, thousands of voices that screeched in frequencies both audible and beyond human hearing. They were hers, and she was theirs, connected by blood and ancient covenant, by the same darkness that had cursed and blessed her lineage for generations uncounted. Stop. She tried to command them mentally, but the connection was overwhelming, drowning her individual in the collective fury of the swarm. I didn't want, but that was a lie, wasn't it? Some part of her had wanted exactly this. Wanted them to see, wanted them to know, wanted them to fear what they had tormented for so long. The beast inside her, the vampire nature she'd suppressed for 17 years, was finally awake, finally acknowledged, and it was ravenous. Marcus Bellingham stood paralyzed at the edge of the courtyard, his eyes fixed on the approaching darkness. His face had gone pale, the confident smirk that defined him replaced by raw, primal terror. Tyler and Jessica had stopped running, and now clung to each other near the school entrance, their previous screams reduced to whimpers as they watched the impossible unfold before them. David Lynn was the only one who moved. He ran to Elena's side, falling to his knees beside her. "Elena, you have to stop them," he urged, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Whatever's happening, whatever you did, you have to make them go away." "I can't." Elena gasped in blood, her own blood, red and human enough, trickled from where she'd bitten her lip in a fall. I didn't know I could." The first wave of bats descended into the courtyard like a living tsunami. They didn't attack immediately. Instead, they circled, their collective movement creating a vortex of wings and screeches that was both beautiful and terrifying. The sound was deafening, a cacophony that seemed to vibrate in the bones, that bypassed ears and resonated directly in the primitive parts of the brain responsible for recognizing predators. Jesus Christ. Marcus finally found his voice, backing away from the swarm. What the fuck is happening? What are those things? They're bats, you idiot, Tyler shouted, though his voice shook. But there are hundreds of them. Thousands. That's not natural. That's not possible. Jessica pointed a trembling finger at Elena. It's her. She did this. She called them somehow. She really is a vampire. We have to run. But running was no longer an option. The bats had formed a perimeter around the courtyard, cutting off all exits. They clung to walls, to windows, to the branches of the ornamental trees that lined the pathway. Their eyes, thousands upon thousands of gleaming eyes, all seemed focused on humans trapped within their circle, waiting, judging. Inside the school, students and teachers pressed against windows, their faces pale with shocking confusion. Some were filming with their phones, documenting the impossible. Others were calling 911, their panicked voices describing an attack, an invasion, a biblical plague. But no one tried to come outside. Some ancient instinct warned them that crossing the threshold would mean entering territory that was no longer subject to human laws. Elena finally managed to push herself into a sitting position. Her hand scraped raw from the pavement. David helped her, his touch gentle despite his obvious fear. Talk to them, he whispered urgently. If you called them, you can send them away, before someone gets really hurt. Could she? Elena reached out mentally, tried to impose order on the chaos. The connection was still there, that invisible thread that bound her to the swarm, but it was tangled, confused, amplified by her emotional state into something she couldn't fully control. She was the eye of a hurricane, and the storm around her responded to her pain, her rage, her fear. Please, she thought, projecting as hard as she could. Please don't hurt anyone. I'm okay now. You can go. The circling slowed slightly, but didn't stop. The swarm's collective consciousness was questioning, not in words, but in impressions, in emotions that translated roughly to threat, harm, protect, punish. They had witnessed her humiliation. Through whatever mysterious senses they possessed, they had felt her call, understood her pain, and come to answer in the only way they knew how. They were extensions of her will, yes, but they were also creatures of instinct, of hunger, of ancient purpose. And their purpose, in this moment, was vengeance. Marcus seemed to sense the danger focusing on him. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Look, Elena, I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have pushed you. I shouldn't have said those things. Please, whatever you're doing, make them stop. Make them go away. I'm trying, Elena said through gritted teeth. Her concentration was fragmenting, split between maintaining the psychic connection and dealing with the physical pain radiating through her body. They won't listen. They're angry. Angry? Jessica's voice climbed toward hysteria. They're bats. Bats don't get angry. They don't organize like this. This is insane. This is impossible. A single bat detached from the swarm, larger than the others, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb light. It flew directly to Elena and landed on her shoulder, its tiny clawed feet gripping her jacket gently. She felt a flood of impressions, concern, curiosity, fierce protectiveness. This one was different, older, more aware, elder, she thought, recognizing the presence. You're an elder. The bat's response was complex, layered with meanings that her human mind struggled to process. But the core message was clear. You are pack. You are blood. You are protected. Elena Draco's. A new voice cut to the chaos, deep, accented, and carrying authority that made even a bat screeching quiet slightly. Elena's head snapped up to see her father striding across the courtyard, seemingly oblivious to the danger surrounding him. Dmitri Draco's was tall and gaunt, his long black coat billowing behind him, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded everyone who saw him that he was more than human. The bats parted for him like a curtain being drawn aside. He moved with purpose until he stood before his daughter, and the expression on his face was one Elena had never seen before, not anger, but something more complex. Disappointment mixed with understanding, fear mixed with pride, resignation mixed with defiance. "Papa," Elena breathed, and suddenly she was a little girl again, frightened and small and desperate for protection. "Papa, I didn't mean to. They pushed me and I fell, and I was so angry, and I know, Mija." Dmitri knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he checked her injuries. "I know. It's not your fault. I should have prepared you better. Should have taught you control, instead of just teaching you to suppress." He looked up at the swarm and spoke in a language that sounded like Romanian, but older, more guttural. The bats responded with a chorus of clicks and screeches, a conversation happening in frequencies and meanings beyond human comprehension. Marcus found a courage, or perhaps just as confusion. "Who are you? What are you saying to them? Can you make them leave?" Dmitri slowly turned his gaze to Marcus, and the boy actually took a step backward. There was something in that gaze, something ancient and hungry and absolutely devoid of mercy, that spoke to the predator-prey dynamic hardwired into human DNA. "You," Dmitri said quietly, "are very lucky my daughter has a kind heart, because if this decision were mine alone, the bats would be the least of your worries." "Mr. Draco's," David interjected, his voice remarkably steady. "The police are coming. I can hear sirens. And everyone in the school is recording this. If the bats hurt someone, if this gets any worse." "I am aware," Dmitri interrupted. He helped Elena to her feet, supporting her weight effortlessly, then righted her wheelchair and carefully lowered her into it. The whole time, the elder bat remained perched on her shoulder, its eyes fixed on the humans with unwavering intensity. Elena could hear the sirens now, too, growing closer. Along with them came other sounds, news helicopters, the rumble of what might be animal control vehicles, the collective chaos of a small town confronting something that shattered its understanding of reality. "Papa, what do we do?" Elena asked quietly. "They know now. Everyone knows. We can't hide anymore." "No," Dmitri agreed, his expression grim. "We can't. The question is whether we run or whether we stand and face what comes." He looked at the school building, at the faces pressed against the windows, at the 3 teenagers who had tormented his daughter and were now cowering in the shadow of consequences they never imagined, whether we let fear define us or whether we demand respect. The swarm had gone eerily still, waiting, thousands of bats hanging motionless in the air, defying physics and reason, their collective presence a question mark hovering over Grayvale. The humans waited too, those in the courtyard, those in the school, those approaching with sirens and cameras. A moment of suspension between the world that was and the world about to be. Elena felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders, heavier than the elder bat that still perched there. She had spent 17 years hiding, suppressing, pretending to be something she wasn't. And in a single moment of pain and rage, she had torn away the veil. There was no going back. But perhaps there could be a way forward that didn't end in bloodshed. She reached out to the swarm one more time, but this time with a different intent. Not commanding, not begging, but communicating. Showing them through the connection what she wanted, what she needed, what she hoped was possible. Witness, she projected. Protect, but do not harm. Let them see. Let them know. Let them understand that different does not mean evil. The swarm's response was hesitant, conflicted. Their instincts cried for violence, for retribution against those who had hurt their bloodkin. But beneath those instincts was something else, loyalty, obedience to the one they served, trust in her judgment. The first police car screeched to a halt outside the courtyard's perimeter. Officers emerged, hands on weapons, faces pale as they took in the scene. Behind them came more cars, more uniforms, and in the distance, the unmistakable vans of news crews. Dmitri placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, opposite the elder bat. "Whatever you decide," he said softly, "I stand with you. We face this together." Elena took a deep breath, feeling her ribs ache from the fall, tasting blood on her lips, sensing the collective consciousness of thousands of bats awaiting her decision. She looked at Marcus, at Tyler, at Jessica, at the fear in their eyes that was so similar to the fear she'd lived with every day. She looked at David, who despite everything hadn't run, who still knelt nearby with an expression that suggested he was trying to reconcile everything he thought he knew with everything he'd just witnessed. And she looked up at the darkening sky, at the swarm that had come when she called, that had responded to her pain with the only gift they could offer, their presence, their power, their willingness to fight for one of their own. "Land," she commanded, pushing the word to the psychic connection with all the authority she could muster. "Land, but do not attack. Form around us. Protect us. Let them see that we are not the monsters they fear, but neither are we victims they can torment without consequence." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, like a black snow beginning to fall, the bats descended. They landed on every available surface, on the ground, on benches, on railings, on the walls and trees and lampposts. They covered the courtyard in a carpet of dark fur and folded wings, thousands of tiny bodies forming a living barrier between Elena and the approaching world. But they did not attack, did not bare teeth or advance threateningly. They simply were an undeniable presence, a statement written in living flesh. "We are here. We protect our own. Challenge us at your peril." The lead police officer, a middle-aged man whose nameplate read Martinez, approached the edge of the bat-covered courtyard with extreme caution. His hand rested on his sidearm, but he seemed intelligent enough to recognize that a gun would be useless against this kind of threat. "Everyone stay calm," he called out, though his voice shook slightly. "Nobody move. Animal control is on the way." "Animal control won't help," Dmitri said, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden quiet. "These creatures aren't rabid. They're not diseased. They're responding to a call they're bound by blood, an ancient covenant to answer. And they will leave when my daughter dismisses them, not before." "Your daughter?" Martinez's eyes found Elena, taking in her wheelchair, her pale face, the elder bat still perched on her shoulder like some dark familiar. How did she? "How doesn't matter," Elena said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "What matters is that I won't let them hurt anyone. But I also won't be humiliated, tormented, and assaulted without consequence anymore." She looked directly at Marcus. "You want to know what I am? I'm someone who's been silent too long. Someone who's been hiding too long. And I'm done." The standoff continued as more authorities arrived, as news cameras captured footage that would go viral within hours, as impossible became documented reality. Elena sat in her wheelchair at the center of a living storm, flanked by her father and surrounded by creatures that defied explanation, and for the first time in her life, she felt something other than shame about her true nature. She felt power, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The judgment had been passed. The question now was what verdict the world would deliver in return. The standoff at Grayvale High School lasted 6 hours. 6 hours during which the sun fully set in darkness enveloped the courtyard, where thousands of bats maintained their vigil around Elena Draco's and her father. 6 hours during which the national news picked up the story, and social media exploded with theories ranging from mass hallucination to government experiments to, closest to the truth but dismissed as fantasy, actual vampires living among humans. 6 hours during which Elena sat in her wheelchair at the eye of the storm, exhausted but unable to release her psychic grip on the swarm, without knowing what consequences might follow. The authorities had established a perimeter, keeping back the growing crowds of curious townspeople and journalists. Spotlights illuminated the courtyard in harsh white light, turning the scene into something theatrical and surreal. Animal control had arrived, taken one look at the situation, and admitted they had no equipment or protocols for dealing with the scale of unusual animal behavior. A specialist had been called, a bat expert from the state university. But even she stood at the perimeter's edge with an expression of academic bafflement, muttering about impossible collective behaviors and questioning whether this was an elaborate hoax despite the clear evidence before her eyes. Marcus, Tyler, and Jessica had been taken inside the school for questioning, along with David Lynn. Through the windows, Elena could see them sitting in the administrative offices, being interviewed by police, and presumably recounting the events that had led to this moment. She wondered what version they were telling, the truth or some sanitized narrative that avoided admitting what they'd done, what they'd discovered. Elena's body ached from maintaining both her physical position and her psychic connection for so long. The elder bat still rested on her shoulder, its warmth a strange comfort. Occasionally it would shift, making small clicking sounds that she had come to interpret as encouragement. Hold strong. Nearly over. We are here. Dmitri stood beside her, a silent sentinel. He had said little since the standoff began, conserving his energy, but Elena could feel his readiness to act if the situation turned violent. Her father was old, not in human terms, but in the way that mattered for their kind. He had lived through centuries, had survived wars and inquisitions and pogroms, had learned when to hide and when to fight. His presence was both reassuring and terrifying because she knew that if he chose to reveal his full nature, what was currently a standoff would become a bloodbath. "Papa," Elena said quietly, her voice hoarse from disuse. "How much longer can we do this? I'm so tired." "I know, Mija," Dmitri replied, his hand gentle on her free shoulder. "But we must hold until we have assurance. Until we know they won't treat us as monsters to be caged or destroyed. The moment you release the swarm, we become vulnerable. But we can't stay here forever. And these bats, they're hungry too. They should be hunting. I can feel it. They're maintaining this formation because I'm holding them, but it goes against all their instincts." Dmitri nodded slowly, "Which is why we must negotiate terms. We must make them understand that we're not a threat to be contained, but citizens with rights who demand protection under the law." "Citizens?" Elena laughed bitterly. "Papa, I'm a vampire. We're vampires. The law doesn't account for creatures that drink blood and command swarms of bats." "Then perhaps it's time the law evolved," a new voice interjected. Elena looked up to see Officer Martinez approaching, hands raised in a peaceful gesture, moving slowly through the carpet of bats that parted grudgingly before him. Behind him came another figure, a woman in her 50s wearing a professional suit, her expression one of careful neutrality. "I'm Detective Sarah Chun," the woman introduced herself, stopping a respectful distance away. "I've been brought in to help mediate the situation. And before you ask, yes, I've been briefed on what happened today, and yes, I've seen the footage from inside the school cafeteria and from various phone cameras." She paused. "I've also spoken with the witnesses, including the 3 students who assaulted you, Miss Dracos." "Assaulted?" Dimitri's voice took on a dangerous edge. "That's what they called it? How generous." "That's what it was," Detective Chin said firmly, "based on multiple witness accounts, including security footage. Marcus Bellingham, Tyler Chin, and Jessica Moreno engaged in a pattern of harassment culminating in physical assault that resulted in you being knocked from your wheelchair and injured. They will be facing charges." Elena blinked in surprise. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't this. Charges? But they'll say I'm a monster, that I attacked them with bats. "Did you?" Detective Chin asked, her expression neutral. "Because from what I understand, the bats haven't actually harmed anyone. They've been intimidating, certainly. Unsettling, but not violent. The only person who sustained injuries today was you." She pulled out a tablet and swiped through some notes. "Scraped hands, bruised shoulder, possible contusion to your hip. The school nurse documented these before we evacuated the building." Dimitri's posture relaxed slightly. "You're saying you believe my daughter is a victim here?" "I'm saying the evidence supports that conclusion," Chin replied carefully. "Now, as for what you are, what you can do, that's a longer conversation. But here's what I know. You're citizens of this town. You pay taxes, you follow laws, you've never been involved in any criminal activity. Your daughter attends school, maintains good grades, and by all accounts has been a model student despite facing consistent bullying that the school administration failed to address adequately." She glanced around at the swarm, her expression unreadable. "The unusual circumstances, your abilities, your nature, don't change the fundamental facts. You have rights, and those rights were violated today." Elena felt tears threatening again, but these were different from before. Not tears of shame or rage, but of something like hope. "You're not going to try to capture us? Study us? Lock us away?" Detective Chin smiled faintly. Miss Draco's. I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. I've seen enough strange things in that time to know that the world is considerably more complex than most people want to admit. Are you dangerous? Potentially. So is anyone. The question is whether you choose to use your abilities to harm or to coexist. Coexist, Elena said immediately. We just want to live in peace. We've always just wanted to live in peace. Then help me make that possible. Chin said, I need you to release the bats. I need the situation to de-escalate so we can have a proper conversation about how to move forward. Can you do that? Elena looked at her father, who studied Detective Chun with ancient eyes before finally nodding. I believe she's sincere, Mija, and we cannot maintain this indefinitely. Taking a deep breath, Elena reached out through the psychic connection one final time. The swarm's collective consciousness had shifted during the long hours. The initial rage and protectiveness had mellowed into something more like patience, trust in her judgment, willingness to follow her lead. Thank you, she projected with all the gratitude and affection she could muster. Thank you for coming when I called. Thank you for protecting me. But it's time to go now. Aunt, feed, return to your lives. I'm safe now. The response was immediate, a wave of acknowledgement, of affection in return, of loyalty that transcended species. The elder bat on her shoulder nuzzled against her neck briefly, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache, then launched itself into the air. As if choreographed, thousands of bats rose as one, lifting from every surface in a massive exodus that filled the air with the thunder of wings. They spiraled upward, forming a tornado of dark bodies that climbed higher and higher into the night sky until they dispersed in every direction, vanishing into the darkness like smoke dissipating on the wind. Within minutes, the courtyard was empty save for the humans. The sudden absence of the swarm felt almost disorienting, like waking from a dream or a nightmare. Elena slumped in her wheelchair, the exhaustion of maintaining that connection for so long finally catching up with her. Easy, Dmitri said, steadying her. You did well, Mija. I'm proud of you. Detective Chin spoke into her radio, giving the all-clear. Within moments, the perimeter was breached by medical personnel, more police, school administrators, and, most disturbingly, what were clearly federal agents in dark suits. Before this gets complicated, Chin said quickly, lowering her voice, you should know that there are people who want to make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Federal agencies, scientific organizations, even military liaisons. They're all very interested in you and your abilities. Dimitri's expression hardened. We will not be experimented upon. We will not be made specimens. I understand, Chin said, which is why I'm going to do everything in my power to keep this at the local level. A simple assault case. A school bullying incident that escalated. The bats? Mass animal behavior phenomenon. Unusual but not unprecedented. If you're willing to keep a low profile, and I can keep the feds at bay, maybe we can all move forward with minimal disruption. And what about school? Elena asked, what about Marcus and his friends? What about everyone who saw, who knows what I am? Chin sighed. That's going to be harder. The footage is already spreading online, though some people are calling it a hoax, CGI, mass hysteria. The 3 students who assaulted you will face consequences, but they'll also likely transfer schools. As for you, she hesitated. You might want to consider online schooling for the remainder of the year. Give people time to process, to forget, to move on. Back into hiding, Elena said bitterly. Temporarily, Chin corrected. Look, social change doesn't happen overnight. Right now, people are scared, confused, but fear fades. And maybe, just maybe, this can be the start of a conversation about diversity that goes beyond what we currently understand, about making space for those who are different in ways we never imagined. David Lynn appeared then, escorted by an officer. He looked exhausted, overwhelmed, but when he saw Elena, he hurried over. Are you okay? They kept asking me the same questions over and over. I told them the truth, that Marcus and the others have been bullying you for months, that they push you, that you were just defending yourself with a swarm of bats. Elena asked Riley. David shrugged. You didn't hurt anyone. That count for something." He hesitated. Then, "For what it's worth, I don't think you're a monster. I think you're someone who's been trying really hard to fit into a world that didn't make space for you. And that's not your fault." The simple acceptance in his voice nearly undid her. Elena reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, David, for not running, for telling the truth." Over the next several hours, statements were taken, reports were filed, and Elena underwent a medical examination that carefully documented her injuries. The school's administrators arrived, looking shell-shocked and terrified of lawsuits, promising investigations into the bullying claims and better protections for vulnerable students. Empty promises, probably, but at least acknowledged. Marcus Tyler and Jessica were let out in handcuffs, a consequence of both the assault charges and the fact that they were 18, legally adults despite still being in high school. Marcus looked small and scared, nothing like the confident bully who had ruled the school hallways. When his eyes met Elena's, he looked away immediately, unable or unwilling to confront what he contributed to creating. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that made Elena feel weak and drowsy, Detective Chin approached one final time. "We're done here for now. You're free to go home. We'll be in touch about court dates and follow-up, but the immediate crisis is over." "What happens next?" Dmitri asked. "Truly?" Chin looked at him with eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Honestly, I don't know. This is unprecedented. But I can tell you this. My job is to protect citizens and maintain peace. As long as you're not a danger to the community, you fall under that protection, whatever else you might be." She handed Dmitri a card with her direct number. "Call me if anyone gives you trouble. Federal agents, journalists, vigilantes. Anyone. I meant what I said about keeping this local." "Why?" Elena asked. "Why are you helping us?" Chin smiled sadly. "Because I had a sister who was different. Autistic, before people really understood what that meant. She was bullied mercilessly, and no one protected her. No one stood up for her. Until one day she just gave up." The detective's eyes grew distant. "So when I see someone who's different being tormented, someone who's trying to exist peacefully in a world that's hostile to their existence, I remember her, and I try to do better." She straightened, her professional demeanor returning. "Get some rest, Miss Dracos. You've had a hell of a day." As they finally left the school, Dmitri pushing Elena's wheelchair, while police kept the press at bay, Elena looked back at the building that had been her prison for so long. The sun was rising fully now, and in its light, Grayvale High looked ordinary, mundane, just a collection of brick and mortar rather than the battlefield it had become. "What do we do now, Papa?" Elena asked as they reached their van. Dmitri was quiet for a long moment, helping her into the passenger's seat with practiced ease. "Now," he finally said, "now we live, not in hiding, not in fear, but openly, with dignity. Because you showed them something important today, Mija. You showed them that being different doesn't mean being powerless, that there are consequences for cruelty, that monsters aren't always the ones who drink blood. Sometimes they're the ones who torment the vulnerable and call it entertainment." As they drove away from Grayvale High School, Elena noticed small groups of bats roosting in trees along the road, as if keeping watch, ensuring their safe passage. The elder bat, or one very much like it, sat on a traffic light, its eyes following their van until they turned the corner and it vanished from view. Elena closed her eyes and let the exhaustion wash over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, questions to answer, decisions to make, a life to rebuild in the aftermath of exposure. But for now, she was simply tired, injured, and strangely at peace. She had been seen. She had been acknowledged. And she had survived. The vampire girl in a wheelchair had called down the sky itself in her moment of desperation, and the world had witnessed that even those it deemed broken, different, and powerless possess a strength that could not be ignored. It was not the ending she would have chosen, but perhaps it was the beginning she had always needed. As they drove through the quiet streets of Grayvale toward home, Elena whispered to the dawn, "I am Elena Dracos. I am vampire. I am disabled. I am other. And I am here." And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, came the answering screech of bats. A benediction, a promise, a reminder that she would never be alone again.